Next guest worked on the COVID-19 modelling that played a major role in Victoria's controversial roadmap out of restrictions. Yet Professor Tony Blakely says there's a faster way out of lockdown, but it comes with a price. He joins us now. Professor, thank you for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Good morning.
OK, just explain how Victoria can come out of lockdown earlier.
Well, first of all, the roadmap is actually very good in its bones. 1, 2, 3 steps, and then into last step, and then into COVID normal. At the moment, we've just gone to the first step. The part that we're concerned about, or by we I mean Victorians, is that part from the second to third step at the release of less than 5 cases per day. That would be appropriate if we're going for elimination. If we're going to learn to live with the virus and accept low levels like New South Wales, we could probably ease that off to something like 10 cases per day, and also be looking more with nuance at, a tight cluster really just equals 1 case. So there is a way that we could go quicker if we're not going for elimination at this point.
You were part of the modelling for Dan Andrews' roadmap out. Was it consistent with what you found and what you recommended?
Yes, it was, because we gave them options. They told us what they want to model. We gave them results back. They selected the one that was at 5 cases per day. We did ones at 10 cases per day and 25 cases per day, and looking at the probability of a third wave. So at 5 cases per day, there's a probability of only 3% of a third wave by Christmas, whereas at 10 cases per day, it's at 10%. So not too much of a change, but really it does come down to whether you're trying to achieve elimination or living with the virus.
That's a difficult thing, isn't it? The Health Minister, Greg Hunt, says Dan Andrews needs to redo the roadmap. Would you agree with that? Do you think, what is the quicker way out of it?
The roadmap does not need redoing. That would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The roadmap structure is really good. I think it's very impressive. We're just talking about one of those triggers. That's the key thing at the moment. It's actually a very good roadmap. It's just the triggers that we're talking about. OK,
and so what trigger needs to change in order for Victoria to start rebuilding and start getting out of this?
Well, first of all, we've just gone into step 1 today. Step 2 is meant to be in 2 weeks' time. Actually, we're tracking very well. We might get to that by this weekend coming, just in 7 days. So that's good, because we're doing well. And then it's the next one when we move to what used to call stage 2, is now called step 3. If we're not going hard for elimination, but we're going for suppression and learning to live with the virus, we could come out of that a little bit earlier. It's not my decision. I totally respect the decision-making process. My job is just to explain to the public how this works and where the decision points are in here. Given how the Victorian Premier Dan Andrews has been, well, consistently stubborn, I can't imagine him changing it. That's not for me to comment on. That's entirely up to him. I'm just here to explain to the public how it works. Say the roadmap is very good in its structure. It's the triggers, and behind the decision about the triggers is whether we're going to learn to live with the virus at something like 20, 30 cases a day, or whether we really are trying to go to elimination. So I've been an advocate of elimination in the past, but the world's changed a bit since then. Yeah. We're closer to a vaccine, so the amount of time to get gain from having a vaccine is less now. We've also seen New South Wales cope reasonably well with living with low levels of the virus. We also would need, if we went for elimination, we'd have to do it with New South Wales and Queensland all at the same time, because the borders are opening up. So the play of the land has changed a bit since 2 months ago. Right, and so restrictions easing today across Victoria. You'll be keeping a close eye on it. Yes, the restrictions easing today are great for a bit of extra liberty. They're not going to change the transmission of the virus too much, I don't think. Fairly gentle, which is appropriate. I'm not saying that that's inappropriate. When you see these gatherings and protesters over the weekend, and some of them turning pretty violent, I mean, what does that do? How does that make you feel about the control of the virus? As a new Victorian, it makes me feel quite sad to see that happening. I'm going to stay focused on the epidemiology and this type of advice to the public, and let other people talk to those issues. Professor, really good to talk to you again. Appreciate your time today. Thank you. Deb. Pleasure.
They are normally fierce rivals, but now Australia's top airlines and travel agents are uniting to fight border restrictions. Qantas and Virgin have joined Flight Centre and Hello World in pleading for state lines to be immediately opened to save their businesses. Flight Centre CEO Graham Turner joins us now from Brisbane. Graham, good morning to you. It's an unlikely union here. Why have you teamed up? Are things really at breaking point, particularly in the Sunshine State?
Yeah, no, good point. I mean, look, we've got no choice. We work together in other areas anyway, so this is not that unusual. Obviously, we have good partnerships with the airlines anyway, and Hello World and Flight Centre Travel Group have very similar interests, and it's obvious, I think, just about from everyone that we have to live with this virus. Why don't we start living with it now? And opening up the borders is obviously absolutely key. You can't have an economic recovery plan in Queensland, for example, that is coming up in the election, if the thing that caused the economic crisis in the first part, which is the closing of the borders and lockdowns, if you don't change that, it's just a waste of time.
It's very difficult, though, to balance out the health demands and the economic demands. Is the biggest issue for you the fact that you don't have a plan? You can't actually plan because there's no real roadmap?
It's the reality is that there's plans coming out. Queensland's got an election coming up, and there are plans coming out, apparently, but these economic plans, both from the Labor government and the LNP opposition, are of no use whatsoever without open borders, because you can't have an economic recovery plan without opening the borders up. So I suppose that's really the key. And obviously Queensland, huge dependence on tourism. And that's why Queensland is in such a deep recession, and it'll get a lot worse, certainly until the borders open up well and until we can trade throughout Australia at the very least.
And what sort of damage are we looking at if there isn't a solution here? Because already we've seen over 500,000 jobs gone from the travel industry, from the tourism sector, and as you say, it's hitting the broader Queensland economy. What are we facing if the lockdown continues?
Look, it's just going to get worse and worse. And in the end, it's not going to get rid of the virus. The virus is going to be here. Even if we get a vaccine, which is looking a bit more hopeful, there'll still be virus around. There won't be a vaccine almost for certain that will eliminate the virus. It'll be such that we have to live with the virus. Why don't we start living with it now? And the other thing that I think is really important, I mean, a few of us a lot of us in the travel and tourism, airline, airport industry are Queensland companies, Queensland headquartered, where our global headquarters of 23 countries is in Queensland. But we consider ourselves an Australian company, not a Queensland company. And I think we should be working this as one Australia, having one Australian strategy and opening those borders up as soon as is safe. And nearly all the borders, it's totally safe at the moment. Most people would agree with that. Victoria's getting things well under control, and we'll have other waves. We'll have infections, and we've just got to learn to live with it as a country, not state by state. It's just not helpful at all.
We know, though, that the Queensland Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, she is standing firm on this. She's saying she'll follow the health advice, which tells her that the borders should remain locked down. Realistically, what do you think this sort of campaign will actually achieve?
Look, it's in our interest to convince the Labor and the LNP parties both to open the borders up. And I'll be surprised if we don't have some reasonable impact on that, because so many people are getting hurt so badly. And this is not just an economic thing. This is a mental and physical health as well as personal freedoms. I mean, you've heard the terrible, heartbreaking stories of people not being able to come to see their dying relatives. So it's a broad community thing, and I think I'll be surprised if in the next month or 6 weeks, with a bit of pressure from our industry and other industries, it's not just about travel and tourism, that it could be such that both parties come to the party and agree that they will open the border up.
Well, let's hope it happens sooner rather than later. Graham, thanks for your time this morning. Carl.
Queensland's top doctors are rallying around the state's chief health officer, warning online bullies and trolls to back off. Jeannette Young has been bombarded with personal attacks over her decision to not exempt interstate funeral goers from quarantining. AMA Queensland President Dr Chris Perry joined us now. Doctor, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks very much,
Just
Carl.
how unfair has the criticism been, in your opinion?
Apparently it's been quite toxic. Jeannette now has a couple of police who are outside her house who go with her everywhere. She's had to have extra help with sorting through the applications for quarantine exemptions. She was getting over 100 per day, and she was trying to deal with it herself. So working from 5 in the morning till 9 or 10 at night, it was quite hard work. She now has 8 or 10 people who can help her do that. So it's been quite stressful, and it hasn't been helped by cowardly people threatening to take the life of a woman.
That is terrible, and certainly there's nothing to justify that. However, she did weigh into Treasury modelling last week. Was that a mistake for her to weigh into the state's finances and justification for restrictions?
I won't go into that. I think the restrictions...
Why not?
It's not my role. The restrictions seem to be justified. Every state has closed borders to an extent, even New South Wales. So, you know, Queensland, we've got quite a lot of freedom. The restaurants are open, maybe not at full capacity because the restrictions, but the economy is booming. My children can't get a place at Noosa at Christmas time. I'm sure our favourite restaurants will be having 3 sessions all the way through. So things are booming up in here. We don't want to be in the same position as Victoria.
There has to be some humanity in these decisions, though,
yes.
given the number of cases that are appearing in Queensland.
Yeah, there has to be, but also we've got to be sensible of comparing the number of cases occurring in Victoria.
But they don't have that number of cases in Queensland.
No, but we don't want them either.
Okay.
So it's quite, you know, you've got to make our choice. Do we have more people at funerals or more COVID funerals? You know, I spent a week ago talking to a friend of mine in intensive care in Melbourne. He could barely get 2 words out in a breath. You know, it's heartbreaking.
Are you satisfied that Queensland contact tracers are up to the task?
Oh, completely.
So
they seem to have closed down.
Why wouldn't you allow people on exemptions through the borders when you can contact trace them?
Well, we've had 2 clusters, probably coming back to the same group who came back from Melbourne, but Melbourne, at its height only a few weeks ago, had 300 clusters, and you can't keep up with that.
OK, when do you believe the borders will open or should open?
I don't know. I think New South Wales will be relatively soon, but I'll leave that to Jeannette Young and the science and the information that she gets. AMAs all over Australia. Our simple message is back the chief health officers and chief medical officers. They seem to have the information, and fortunately our jurisdictions are largely following them.
Have the federal chief medical officers got it wrong?
I don't know. But anyway, there's different forces on different groups, but Queensland, South Australia, West Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory to a lesser extent, they're very happy with what's happening. Northern Territory now let Sydney people fly to Darwin. We'd like to see our border open to New South Wales as soon as it's safe to do that. We look after a lot of people from northern New South Wales in Brisbane hospitals. We'd like to see them open, but when they're ready, they're ready.
And your own doctors on those borders are saying they need to open.
Yep. Yep, it's a hard call.
OK. We appreciate your time. None of this is easy, and hope to see you in Noosa at Christmas.
Oh, I'll be there, Carl. Thank you.
Whatever. Thanks, Doc.